Okay, so before I talk about the geospatial data strategy, it's important to understand what germinated the strategy, and that was the Geospatial Data Act that was signed by the president into law in the fall of 2018, where it applied to a variety of different executive departments, which are called covered agencies, which you can see on the slide there. And there are also lead covered agencies, which I'll get into a little bit later, which are responsible for data themes in the national data as part of that are national geospatial data assets for the national spatial data infrastructure. And what the Geospatial Data Act tried to do is it tried to formalize the way different agencies organize their data, use their apply their metadata, use approved standards so that each agency itself can work better and more consistently within the various different geospatial stakeholders in these very large executive agencies, and that the information is discoverable and shareable by a whole variety of not only U.S. government users, but the public as well. And so there are 13 requirements that are part of the Geospatial Data Act for the covered agencies. And the very first of these requirements is to publish a geospatial data strategy. And so that was the first challenge we had as a department that never had a geospatial data strategy, didn't have a person responsible for that geospatial data strategy, or any governance structure as to how data should be maintained, standards should be approved, and we have a consistent way to make maps and do our analysis. So there were 12 other basic requirements of this law as well that each agency has to provide an annual report on, as well as part of the law is that each agency is subject to an inspection by that agency's Office of the Inspector General, and that tends to get people's attention. So what is the geospatial data strategy? I just described a little bit about what what the law requires, and the State Department's strategy outlined 4 goals and 13 actual objectives. We organized under the State Department's Enterprise Data Council, which launched the State Department's first enterprise data strategy, a subgroup of that body called the Geospatial Data Act Working Group, or the GDOG, and we have 14 or 15 different stakeholders in various offices in the department that we survey on a fairly regular basis to get their input that helped us not only design the geospatial data strategy, but figure out how best we can implement the strategy and coordinate good, solid, consistent data throughout the agency. So as you can see in Section 759 of the Geospatial Data Act, this is the section that requires each covered agency to publish a signed geospatial data strategy under the cover of, in our case, the Senior Agency Official for Geospatial Information, which is the geographer, which is me, and also the Chief Information Officer and the Chief Data Officer. So the geospatial data strategy of the Department of State is out under the 3 different signatures I just described. The U.S. Department of State is also a lead covered agency where we are responsible for the International Boundaries theme, which is a national geospatial data asset of the national spatial data infrastructure that I described before. And so we have to go through similar processes and procedures to make sure that the data set that we are responsible for, international boundaries, is published on the U.S. government geo platform in a way that is easily discoverable, downloadable, and consistent, and can be used across all government agencies. This is the fine print that tasked us with the 3 major tasks that I just talked about, responding to the 13 requirements of the Geospatial Data Act, the first and foremost of which is design a strategy, submit an annual report that discusses, among other things, how we are implementing the strategy, and be subject to an Office of Inspector General audit every 2 years. This I pulled from the Act itself, describing the 2 of the 3 requirements I just went through. And it was a painstaking effort. We worked with our Bureau of Budget Planning, as well as getting guidance from the Federal Geographic Data Committee, which is empowered under the Geospatial Act to marshal the various different FGDC members and covered agencies to submitting an annual report that is consistent across agencies. So between the requirements of the Act, the FGDC, the State Department's own requirements for publishing any strategy, as well as recognizance from all of the various different stakeholders across the department which use geospatial data in a variety of different ways, we came up with what is now published as our geospatial data strategy that is aligned with the 7 guiding documents and legislation you can see on the slide there. So basically, we want to make sure we implement the tasks and activities that are designed as part of geospatial data strategy in a way that's consistent across all the various different State Department stakeholders, is consistent with the State Department's enterprise data strategy, and is consistent with the way other executive agencies that are covered under the Geospatial Data Act are applying their geospatial data. So the goal of the Geospatial Data Act and the goal that the State Department has underpinning its strategy is very simple. We want to enhance the department's mission capabilities to make data-driven policy decisions. And we had 4 basic goals: increase geospatial data sharing and accessibility, ensure reliable geospatial data and tools, develop foundational geospatial data awareness, and develop a repeatable geospatial data repository to meet the requirements of the Geospatial Data Act. I will say that the State Department itself does not own and generate a lot of geospatial data, other than the international boundaries data set that my office is responsible for. We are primarily a user of data that are generated from other other organizations, implementing partners. So while we will make an effort to post as much of the data that we use, we are actually not responsible by law to post a great deal of this data. Plus, a lot of the information and data we have might be either classified or, more likely, personal information that we would not want to make available to the public. So we have a lot of geospatial data on locations of facilities, on locations of American citizens, but we are not under an obligation to make those types of data public.
Huh? You're going for it. It's that.
Okay, as part of the geospatial data strategy, published as an annex is our implementation roadmap, where we will work to collect, measure, learn, and report on how we are working through the various different parts of the State Department. We consider this strategy an iterative document, a live document, if you will, that is constantly going to be updated as we come into compliance with all the requirements of the Act. It's on a 3-year cycle where we have to reevaluate the goals and objectives after 3 years.
What do you mean? I'm tired. I just
We
told you
are
that.
looking into devoting more resources towards implementing the geospatial data strategy, because the Geospatial Data Act itself stipulates that each covered agency is supposed to dedicate the resources necessary to implement the geospatial data strategy and meet all the various different requirements of the Act. So what have we accomplished? Bottom line, we have published a signed strategy that we have hosted on State Department and the Geo platform sites. We have worked very carefully to align this strategy with a variety of different strategic goals of the State Department and be consistent with how other agencies are approaching their geospatial data strategies under guidance from the Federal Geographic Data Committee. And thank goodness we closed out the recommendations from the audit of the Inspector General. We are going to start another Inspector General audit cycle soon. And that audit is to make sure that that the department is in compliance with the requirements of the Act. Next steps are to actually utilize this Geospatial Data Act working group, the GDOG we've set up at the State Department, to figure out how to implement it among the various different stakeholders. We have a SharePoint site where we share all our information internally. We have communities of practice on things like data governance, discoverability, various different ways we have to, different parts of the State Department have different interests in terms of what they prioritize in their geospatial data. And so we will develop these ad hoc communities of practice that will attack these one priority at a time. And then we will have regular surveys to report our annual progress to the Congress via the GeoDC and try to implement our goals and objectives over the next 3-year cycle. So that is the geospatial data strategy in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take any questions and possibly provide answers.